Good evening and welcome to Monday Night Fitba for another week. We have a huge amount of talking points this week and we have a huge amount of people in the studio. We're improvising chairs and everything in here tonight.
Emergency chairs.
Connor, you comfortable over there?
Oh yeah, really comfortable.
Good, it won't be for too long, I promise. We have the panel in the studio, the smaller studio at the moment, and we're going to kick off. We're going to make sure that everything is set up correctly, and then we are going to bring in Kenny MacAskill and Jim Adie of the Hibernian Supporters Limited board, and we are going to have a large discussion with the Hibbies and those guys about the Hibs share process that we're going through at the moment, and we're going to see if we can answer some of the lingering questions about that and hopefully provide a bit of a service for you guys listening out there. Right, Connor, you have suggested a topic for the opening question. We're going to spend a few minutes on it. Each person will have the opportunity to express their views. I'm going to let you go first because normally we go with a specific kind of question here. You've instead gone with more of a talking point, and that talking point is very topical at the moment, is drinking in football.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it seems like certain politicians are using this as maybe a bit of a vote grabber at the minute. It's obviously quite a populist shout. It inspires quite a lot of debate, and you know, it's something that I reckon most fans are still disagree on. I don't think there's a popular consensus or, you know, a mass movement to try and get people drinking in football again. Personally, and from a very selfish point of view, you know, I'm 29 going on 59. I just think it'd be a nuisance. I mean, I feel like I play musical chairs at Easter Roads most week anyway. People getting up to go to the toilet, or fat children needing to go and get another pie, and I just, you know, add people drinking, you know, plastic pints of beer onto that, and then inevitably needing the toilet 15 minutes later. It's just going to be up and down for the entire game. That aside, I mean, I don't really think there's a real need for it, to be honest. I don't particularly miss having a pint of the football. It wouldn't be, you know, as we've seen on the news the other day, they've been showing the archive footage of that 1980 Cup final between Rangers and Celtic, where there was bottles being thrown on the pitch, etc. You know, people wouldn't be carrying, they're taking their carryouts into games as it was back then. It would be, as you're at tea in the park or something, a plastic cup full of overpriced beer, and I think the novelty would wear off quite quickly. So although I'm not necessarily against people drinking at football, I just think the nuisance value is what would put me off. Okay, let's go around the studio then. We'll do introductions as well. So my name is Sam Meakin, I'm your host, and I'm kind of undecided, but I agree with you, Connor. I think it's probably a bit pointless. Personally, I'm quote unquote straight edge, so it makes no difference to my life whatsoever. I don't drink anywhere, so it won't make a difference. I certainly, like you say, I don't think I would be, even if I did drink, I don't think I would be that desperate that I would pay, you know, probably £4.50 for a stale cup of beer at Tynecastle. I mean, the catering at Tynecastle is questionable at times, to say the least. Anyway, I'm not sure I would really trust a pint of beer. Mikey, firstly, before we go into the drinking topic, did I see that you set yourself up with a Twitter account earlier?
Sam, I've always had one. I just never ever felt the inclination to use it, and I had 5 minutes at work where I had spare time.
Yeah, getting all your followers quite happy.
Well, you're a big star these days. You're the first famous person every Sunday I know.
Oh, absolutely.
So thanks. Yes, I have now joined the world of Twitter actively.
Okay, what's your at?
You're pushing it now. At M for Michael Wilson 0811.
Okay,
keep it clean.
What is your opinion on drinking at the football?
I'm probably not dissimilar to Connor, to be honest. I don't. Obviously, we've never really lived in a sort of time where it was available at the match. Been to games in England quite a few times, and I don't think it appears to add any sort of kind of uncomfortable edge to the game, but yeah, I don't feel there's a great need for it, especially because the way it's going to work, I assume we'll be the same that it does in England. It's pre-match, half-time, and that's it.
Yeah.
So people aren't going to be able to, you know, like at basketball or baseball, they'll have, like, you know, drinks throughout the match.
Yeah, I think the legislation at the moment seems to state it not in view of the pitch, so you can drink on the concourse, but as soon as you attempt to step out with a pint of lager, you're going to get stopped by the stewards.
So realistically, like, we should be at the point where people should be grown up enough to be allowed to make the choice. But if it's going to start bringing into sort of play costs like licensing that maybe don't exist, a different type of license to sell it during the match in a concourse area, potential fines for getting things chucked on the pitch, then I'm not going to be sort of standing signing petitions and stuff saying we must have this right back. People always keep quoting that, you know, rugby fans are allowed to do it, but I don't think there's ever been a history of alcohol related trouble at rugby matches, maybe in the rugby club afterwards or down the grass market, but I feel that at matches, if it happened, fair enough. I think it just potentially adds costs for stewarding, policing. I think we could do without it, but I'm neither here nor there really. One of the big areas where the rugby comparison can be challenged is the fact that most rugby games, particularly the international games that people are talking about when they're talking about drinking, they don't really operate segregation either. So if those fans are free to come and go as they please and they can sit in amongst and that doesn't cause problems, then straight away that removes any comparison to the Fitba, really, because none of us are saying, let's just remove all restrictions. Celtic fans can sit in my Hearts fans at Tynecastle and we'll have a pint together. And the culture of the two sports is different. There's not that same kind of tribal kind of rivalry at times, hatred that does exist in football at times, and alcohol has proven to sort of spike that a wee bit. So I think we can do without. If it came back, so be it. I'm not going to sit and say it's a disgrace.
Sean, you attended with myself many games at Anfield last season, and as Mikey said there, you can encounter the drink at the football close up. Did you feel it made a difference to the experience at all, positively or negatively?
I didn't feel it made a difference whatsoever to me at the game. I never felt there was too many drunk people around me. I think the effect, however, that it may have in Scotland as opposed to in England, we've had a break from it. So being opened back up to it leaves people looking to exploit that, still going to the pub before the game and then coming in an hour before the game and having even more drink than they usually would do, and leading to drunker people than there was previously. Now, usually that'll be the younger crowd. Also, when you see the age of the staff actually working, serving you pies or whatever, like, are we trusting them to ID the people when they're going? That's neither here nor there. But going to the Liverpool games last season with you, it is a good money spinner for the clubs. However, looking at their setup, they open 2 hours early, so it's basically like going to the pub before the game, but they also have 2 big screens, one showing a live game, one showing Sky Sports News or whatever. They have the facilities to keep people entertained while they're drinking. Tynecastle wouldn't really be able to hold up to that. I only know the away end at Easter Road, but I didn't think they'd be able to hold up to that either, to keep the people entertained while they're doing it, which to me would lead to people necking their drinks and going for another. Once again, though, I'm not the target market like you, not so straight edge, but I very, very rarely drink, so it wouldn't affect me. I went to some of the NFL as well this year. I did see one person drink almost their body weight in mojitos, fall down the stairs and ruin it for a lot of the people around them.
No one's proposing we're going to get mojitos.
You never know.
I mean, that is simply too far.
It's a cocktail list.
But it definitely can have a negative effect. So,
okay, Craig or Ross, are either of you the target market here? Are either of you mad boozers at the Fitba?
Not really, no. I mean, I've got a little boy who's I've got him a season ticket at Easter Road. So.
And is he a mad boozer, like?
Well, no, but the drinking side of things wouldn't really affect me too much. But I think if I'm neither here nor there with it. If it comes back, then it comes back. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But I think if they're going to do it, they need to introduce it slowly. Do it for the low-profile games like if we're talking Hibs, Hearts, Celtic, Rangers, Aberdeen, do it Hibs against Wraith, Hibs against Dumbarton, Hearts against Cowdenbeath. If you have the first game back, potentially Hibs and Hearts, drinking, available at the ground, and we both see it and I've been in the away end at Tynecastle so many times, yourselves probably Easter Road so many times. You see that the sort of corners nearest the away stand, could you imagine those type of people with another couple of pints in them? It would just cause, for me, that would be too much hassle, to be honest.
Okay, Ross, wrap us up on this topic.
Well, I'm a wee bit kind of on the fence here about this because basically, my opinion on football fans in general, especially with the Flares stuff that came up at the beginning of the season. I don't trust the average football fan as far as I control them, to be honest. And fair enough, the kind of left wing person likes to give people the choice. I am actually in fact a fan of drinking before the game, maybe, because people are going to drink before the game anyway, if they are or not. If that involves income going into the club rather than the pubs nearby, I'm all for it. But then you've got to think about the close proximity of the fans together drinking in the same place, which isn't the best at most of the times. Never mind at a football ground. Yes, we need to spend more on stewarding and policing. Overall, I am kind of for it. If you were to put a gun to my head, I would say yes, go ahead with it, but it has to be properly policed and only before the game.
Okay, I think the interesting thing there is that we have got a selection of ages in here, but from early 20s to kind of early 30s, which you think would really be the target market for this.
Yep.
And yet none of us seem that desperate for it, which I suppose in its own right tells a story, and it goes back to what Connor said initially, that this does sort of point towards some politicking going on here and some people raising this agenda. It doesn't necessarily seem that it's the fans really pushing this, so I suppose that's interesting in its own right. To find that we're all a wee bit non-committal about it, really, not overly bothered. Right, what we're going to do, we're going to go a couple of quick ads, and we are going to have a very quick turnaround in the studio. We're going to try and move out half of the guys here, get rid of the Jambos for a period of time, and bring the Hibs Supporters Limited board in, and then we will get to the important chat about the share issue that's ongoing at the moment. Bear with us. We will be back very shortly on Radio Saltire with Monday Night Football.
Radio Saltire is a community radio station located in Trinent and East Lothian. We are looking for presenters and station volunteers of all ages. So if you think you've got what it takes or always wanted to give it a go, we can train you up and give you that opportunity. So please get in touch by emailing info@radiosaltire.org or contact us using the website www.radiosaltire.org, community radio station for Scotland.
Thank you for staying tuned to Monday Night Football. We are back, and I am going to relinquish hosting duties for the first time in the history of the show. I'm going to hand over to Connor, who's going to chair the discussion right now on the Hibs Supporters Limited.
Thank you very much, Sam. So, as we say, got two very special guests here from HSL. We've got Kenny MacAskill and Jim Adie. Guys, would you like to introduce yourself and just tell us a little bit about how you're involved with the share issue?
Hi, I'm Jim Adie, and I became involved many months ago. I was part of a small group of Hibs fans who have always had an interest in fan ownership, and at some point along the road I had a chat with Kenny and Charlie and Jackie, and we've just been watching what was going on, and then latterly were asked to get involved.
Yeah, that's much the same for myself. I was approached obviously by Jim, equally by Charlie Reid, who's always been one of my closest friends. I've always had a boyhood and lifelong affinity to Hibs, and I was approached about coming on board, and I think this is the time for all of us to put our shoulder to the wheel.
Excellent. Well, before we get into sort of the nitty gritty about the share issue, Kenny, I've seen in an interview that you've admitted you're not a fanatical Hibs fan, but it's good to hear that you're a boyhood fan.
boyhood fan stood in the terraces. Equally, as I've always made clear, I've had other things. I've been involved in the referendum campaign. I've fought the poll tax. I couldn't afford to be on the terraces week in, week out, but it's always been the club's results that I look for. It's the club I have an affinity to, and equally, I've made it quite clear, and part of what I'm doing here is Hibs are not just the football club every second Saturday or whatever night of the week they're playing. They're part of the community in the city, certainly the east where I live and represent, and indeed out here in East Lothian and East Central Scotland. So the football team results important, that's always critical, but Hibernian are an institution in the city of Edinburgh and in Scotland, and I give them my support.
Fantastic. Do you have any sort of particular warm memories growing up of specific players or squads? That,
Oh, absolutely. I've got an old pal of mine who's well into his 80s. He always used to say that every person can narrate one team, and his ability was to narrate the Rangers team that played Moscow Dynamo, not in the Cup Winners' Cup final, but in whatever it was, 1945. And he narrated that, and I could still narrate the Hibs team of the early 70s with, Harriet, Brownlee, Shadler, Blackley, Black, Stanton, Edwards, O'Rourke, Gordon, Cropley and Duncan.
Well rehearsed.
Johnny Hamilton on the bench.
Good show. That's
I think every Scots guy it's harder now for youngsters because you've got squads of so many more, whereas then you got the odd player injured or whatever, but I think every Scotsman of my age can probably narrate their own football team that they watched.
They've probably got maybe, like, for my age, maybe the 91 Skull Cup team is probably about as glorious as it gets.
Mine would be the 2005 Mowbray team. It's probably mine's. My age there.
There's a few names in there that maybe would slip your mind. I don't know, Sam Morrow and Anton Murray and jumping
legends. Hibs folklore.
But that's good. No, it's good. I think that's what Hibs fans like to hear, is that the people that are involved in the share issue genuinely. Well, what about you, Jim? Have you got a specific Hibs team from the past?
Yeah, exactly the same as Kenny's. Turnbulls, Tornadoes, yeah, absolutely.
So we're all in our mid to late 20s, so we don't have
not see many great European nights in our time.
Aye, the glory days.
Now, Kenny, when were you wary of getting involved with the share issue, given your primary vocation as a politician? We posted this topic on Hibsnet saying questions for Kenny MacAskill, and after about 10 replies was like questions for Kenny MacAskill about Hibs. I won't repeat what you said. You can imagine the kind of questions that were getting asked, and we did get a few good ones, but were you potentially wary of getting involved with something that would alienate members of your constituency that are perhaps Hearts fans? Or we've noticed on this show how tribal people can be, and how unreasonable people can be at times, and adversely, your role as a politician, were you concerned that could act as a distraction?
No, I think you do what you think is right, and I think if you do that, people respect you. I've never hidden the fact that I was a Hibs supporter, and when I served in the government under the former First Minister Alex Salmond, he knew my allegiance and I knew his, and his was for the team on the other side of the city. So I think people will respect and understand that I'm doing this not simply for the football club, but as the football club as an institution. It's no longer in the constituency with the boundary changes, but you just come out the stand and you're into the constituency, and it's the place in which I was born, I live, and I'm privileged to represent. So making sure that we get Hibs not just, as I say, performing in the park, but performing in the community. And what also persuaded me wasn't just the eloquence of Jim and the cadging of my pal Charlie Reid. I think it's the plans that the club have to develop much more of a community focus, not simply at the stadium but out here in McMurray, to make sure that they give to the community as well as benefit from the community going through the turnstile.
No, that's great. I mean, just to go slightly off topic for a second, I've just been reminded of a poster on Hibsnet wanted to know if Alex Salmond ever gave you the 5-1 gesture, and how hard did you punch him afterwards?
Well, I have to say, I was at Hampden with him. To be fair, I think he was magnanimous in victory. He was there with his old dad as well, who I knew. So no, it was a hard time. I was sitting next to Laurie Riley at that game, and I was more worried about Laurie's health when the
poor man. Yeah. No, that's a shame. I mean, how has the share issue gone so far? Just in general, are you pleased with how the last few weeks have been?
Yeah, we've got off to a superb start. Bearing in mind some of the difficult headwinds that we had to put up with in the early days, but within 5 days, we managed to get as much as 25,000. So you'll have seen at the Arbroath game, we acquired our first share certificate, which effectively is about 0.5% in the club. Things continue to go well, and with a wee bit of luck, by the end of this month, maybe early March, we'll be doing the same again. So that'll bring us up to 50,000, and that is just within the first weeks. So we're very pleased.
No, that's really impressive, considering. 'Cause, I mean, one thing I was concerned about is that Hibs don't seem to be in any tangible financial peril at the moment. There's not this panic. Quick, the team might not be here next week. We need you to buy shares. So I was worried if maybe the impetus wouldn't be there for people to rush out and cough up. But that sounds like it's gone very well so far. Was that something you were concerned about?
Yes, and I think we've said before that the biggest enemy could be apathy, and I think it was my colleague on Saturday had said that we should remind ourselves that it's going to be a marathon rather than a sprint, and I think that still is the case. And I'm also reminded by quite a number of the Hearts guys that for the foundation, theirs took quite a while as well. I think we're all sort of under the impression that they gathered together 8,000 overnight, when in fact, they actually, it took them a few years to get to that number. So I think we've got to be realistic, but we're certainly all optimistic.
Yeah, fantastic, because I mean, one thing I thought, there's definitely a split between fans, but I don't think it's a negative split that's sometimes been reported. I think a good 50% of the fans, a lot of the sort of backroom, politics and share issues, whatever, it's just background noise. They just go to the games and don't really pay attention to what's happening behind the scenes. Have you got any specific sort of strategy for targeting these fans, people that maybe wouldn't usually take an interest?
Well, we've got a duty to engage, because I think we understand that people have questions, that they want information, as some of us were discussing earlier. Some information we can't give because it's commercially confidential in terms of the relationship between Hibs and the bank. But other things, we want to be quite clear about what we're doing and why, how we want to make sure that we're acquiring the shares, but we democratise it, because we're not in it forever. We're here to be replaced at the end of the stage by those who chip in. So we've got a strategy of engagement. I've been meeting with other organisations, as have Jim, and the phone's there, the doors open, and we're happy to chat. Equally, I think people realise that this is a journey. You're right, this isn't come about because of financial catastrophe where necessity is the mother of invention. That's actually a good thing. I think it's much better that the money that's being raised, that's acquiring the shares, is going to the benefit of the club rather than actually keeping the show on the road. So I think there's an upside to it as well as a downside. So our strategy is to engage, to be open, which is why we're here discussing with you and engaging with your wider audience, to make it clear that we're happy to answer questions that people have. And as I say, I think what we're seeing, as Jim was saying, folk are coming on board. This is a journey. It's not a buyout. It's a buy-in. We're buying into the club, and it's also clear if people don't want to come with us at HSL, they can buy their shares separately. We actually think there's good reason why they should come, because better to be part of 30%, 40% than be 0.1% or whatever. And the only caveat we've also had is that it should be one member, one vote. If somebody puts down 5,000 or somebody puts down £18.75, you shouldn't be able to buy any greater influence, and that will be one of the founding principles of Hibernian Supporters Limited. We're asking people to give what they can. Some can give much more than others, but they shouldn't therefore thereafter have any greater say. This is about moving away from football clubs being the prerogative of rich few to actually being owned by the community and the fan base.
I think it's important that principle is kind of adhered to, that if everyone's putting what they can in this collective fashion rather than going the direct route, then it is one payment, one vote, whichever what the size of that payment is. So I think that's really important. Hopefully people appreciate that element of it, and it's not a case of snapping up all the direct shares that they possibly can. That's great, the money still goes to the club, but I think it's an interesting alternative to be able to do this mass group purchase, and then truly, like you say, democratise it and have the people make the decisions that this vote will have. So I think that's a great alternative to have, and especially in the football club, we've not had that for a great number of years now. So it's a great option and alternative to have.
Well, I mean, in these early weeks, it has been heartwarming, really heartwarming when you see. I mean, we've received donations at £1,000 level and £750 and £500, and we've set the membership number at 225. So when you know that some of these people have stepped forward in the full knowledge that they only get one vote, it is so heartwarming, and they're standing shoulder to shoulder with a student who's signed up to pay a tenner a month, and it literally is the ethos of the community spirit, and I think it's fantastic.
Absolutely. I mean, one thing that's going to be happening in the near future, obviously, is season ticket drive, or the season tickets for next year, and it was a little contentious in the previous year because we were still charging full price for season tickets, and we're now in the Championship. That seems to have been vindicated by our strong transfer window. However, how would you feel? What would you say to fans who were maybe making a choice between signing up for a direct debit to season ticket or potentially contributing slightly less in terms of share and paying for tickets on a weekly basis as they were able to?
I think it has to be the individual fan's choice. At the end of the day, we want fans to be able to go, and priority number one is for them to go, whether it's as a season ticket or whether it's individual tickets. That's a choice they might make. If they don't have the wherewithal, then they remain Hibernian supporters, and we will act in their interests. It's simply, as I say, if they've got the wherewithal at whatever level, we would ask them to come in with us. So I think that's a decision. Obviously the club will decide and set the rates, and hopefully we'll be back in the Premiership. So I think that's a choice for the individual. All we're saying is give what you can, back the club, not simply back the club, as I say, in terms of turning up every second Saturday, but back the club in terms of taking control and influence and direction for the club, and let's make it the power that it can be in the football world, as well as giving it a greater say in the community in East Central Scotland.
No, that's grand. I was just going to go to a few questions that fans were asking on Hibsnet about the share issue and just about your involvement in general. There's been certain groups, obviously, that have been a bit of a spanner in the works, and personally, I don't know if you guys feel the same, but I feel like they've had more than enough publicity. But we can talk about it if you like. But Erie on Hibs.net is wondering, if you felt like the reporting of the HSL was a little negative in the media compared to, for example, Foundation of Hearts, which was generally praised.
Well, I think some of that comes back to the points that were made earlier. Hearts came around from a position of devastation in the club, and good luck to them. We've engaged with them to work out the good things that they've done to try and learn lessons from them, because although we support different teams, we're actually on the same side in terms of what we're trying to achieve in terms of fan ownership. I think people are entitled to their say. We would hope that they would listen to us, we'd meet with us and discuss with us, and if they don't agree, then at least we can part in peace. The media, I have to say, I think that's part and parcel of how the media operate. They operate that way with regard to players, they operate that way with regard to managers, and they operate with that regard to people who are running supporters organisations. That's and I say that having some friends that are sports reporters, it goes with the turf. That's what they think makes good copy.
I just think quite a few Hibs fans were feeling like they were being misrepresented, because a lot of my non-Hibe mates were saying, there's a big split in the support, sort of people really against the share issue, and I've not found that to be true personally. I think most people are generally quite supportive of it.
Well, I think you're quite right. I mean, we were both at the AGM, and I think Rod Petrie's had his detractors, as is Sir Tom Farmer, but both spoke. I thought both did remarkably well, and Tom Farmer got a standing ovation from a huge section of the sector there. That's people are entitled to their opinions, but it does seem to me that there's a direction of travel now, which is people are getting behind the team. They're seeing what Alan Stubbs is doing on the park. They're seeing and hearing about what George Craig is doing off the park. They're seeing the benefit of what Leanne Dempster is doing and bringing it all together. There's a feel good coming back about the club, and this is an opportunity to take the club back to the ownership of the fans to, for the first time, move it away from being perhaps at the whim of somebody else. So good things are happening, and I think the overwhelming majority of fans welcome what's happening and are coming on board.
No, I think that's true, and I think we possibly don't have quite as many questions for you tonight as we maybe normally would have, because there's a massive amount of information on Hibs forums, on the HSL website, and on the Hibernian website. So I think there is a large amount of information. Most questions have been answered, I think, all around, which is really positive to see the club communicating in that fashion after a few years of relative silence and frustration amongst supporters. So it's a really positive thing.
Yeah, and I think people should recognise it's a great opportunity to actually become really involved with the club. And going back to one of the other points that you mentioned about Hibs are not in the same situation as Hearts were, and there's no one pressing here for money. But what would be good is membership, and that's what we're really keen on, is people to join in for the membership, because it is democratic. And we want as many people as possible to have a say in the running of their football club. And it's as simple as that.
And yeah, that brings me on to another question. Super Furry Hybe asks, how you see the future of the club. I mean, what is the goal once the 51% target is reached? Are there any plans for the future? Any targets for generating income after then?
Well, some of that would be for those who be in charge at the time. As I say, I think I've taken on board this to try and make sure that we buy in to the greatest extent that we can. I don't see myself being in situ for ever, and I think what we is on a journey where we want to acquire influence initially, and that will result initially in a membership of the board. Ultimately, to make sure that this is a fan-owned club and to see where we can take it from there. It's what we choose to make it. It's what the Hibernian supporters choose. As I say, the club is being opened up in terms of a stadium that lies empty in many instances, 6 days if a week, if not 13 days out of 14 in a fortnight. All that's going to change, and I think I'm really in great admiration of what Leanne Dempster's doing there. But this is also about opening up the club and how we run it. So to some extent, I don't think that's a question that Jim and I can answer. That'll be a question for those who are members of Hibernian Supporters Limited and the supporters who have bought in individually. Collectively, we can make this club what we want it to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it depends on the ambition and the generosity of the Hibs fans. Our club will be as good as we make it. If we contrast it with the Foundation of Hearts arrangement, they've got 8,000 members, and with the generosity that they have there, they're contributing something like about 1.4 million per year into the coffers, and that goes onto the park. So it's about the ambition that we have for our club, and clubs the size of Hibs and Hearts are notorious that our ambition is usually higher than our income. Now, what we do about that is in our hands, but at least we've got the opportunity to do something about it.
No, I think that's a good point, and I think as you've been saying, since Leanne Dempster has come on board, I think a lot of Hibs fans recognise that she's been our most important signing in some time. I mean, I know Alan Stubbs is doing really well just now, but it was Dempster that selected him, and some thought it was maybe a bit of a left field choice. And some of the things that have happened over the last few months, the food bank collection, which happened, which I know Hands on Hibs were involved in, that was something a lot of Hibs fans were quite proud of, and I think that's the kind of direction that people would like to see the club going in more often, is community involvement, getting back involved with people in Leith and beyond, that make the club give the club back to the people, which was obviously the point of this year. I've got a few sort of broader questions about that we've been discussing, but I was wondering if Mikey or Craig had any further questions for you, so I'm not dominating proceedings.
No, I was going to ask the same the super furry Hibbies question regarding the kind of strategy once 51% had been achieved, but obviously it's kind of, like you say, it's more up to the democratic People's Republic of HSL when we get to that point as to what happens. That was kind of what I was going to follow up on. So that's interesting to know that it's going to be the realisation that it's going to be much more a lot of voices making that choice, and then sort of narrowing it down to some kind of rhetoric of some description that's a more kind of fixed direction.
Well, the other thing, of course, is that it's widely reported that most Hibs fans have called for change, and that's what's happening. You know, the existing owners, Rod and Sir Tom Farmer, I think I've been on record to say they recognise the need for change, and they're offering us that opportunity. Now, where that goes, as Kenny said, this is just the start of it. Where it goes, what direction it goes, is in our hands. And if we don't step forward and take that opportunity, then it might not go in the direction that we would all like it to go. So I think the message is tonight is to get as many Hibs fans as possible to recognise that there's an opportunity here, and the contribution level starts at £10, often misquoted as being $18.75, but if you're not quite able to manage the $18.75, you can come in at £10. It takes a wee bit longer to get there, but your voice and your contribution is equally valued, the same as anybody else.
If I may be so rude as to jump in as an outsider in this situation, on the subject of Leanne Dempster, I think even as a Hearts supporter, I think en masse we would acknowledge that Leanne Dempster is having a positive influence at Hibs, and it's an influence that was needed to bring a fresh voice and a new impetus to the club. But is there a conflict of interest having the chief executive of the club, part of the establishment, as part of the board of a group to provide the supporters with a voice? Is there any issue? Was there any discussion as to whether that was the best way to go, to have Leanne actively as part of the board of Hibernian Supporters Limited?
Yes, I think the honest answer to that is yes, there was. At the early stages when we were having a discussion when the club approached us. But you've got to set that against the background of what was taking place at the time, and there were other groups around, if you like. And I think there was an element of kind of distrust, if you like, among certain groups. So you had to set that in context and say, well, there was a lot of advantages also in being closely aligned with the club, and a lot of people take comfort and trust from the proximity of being close to the club. And also, I know Kenny's spoken before about this, there's resources. The stark reality is that all the rest of us have got jobs. We don't have the resources that you can apply to it, whereas the club do. Leanne obviously has had experience in fan ownership as well. And at the end of the day, there's 5 supporter directors, there's 2 club nominated directors, and I've got to say, thus far, there's never been any conflict. And bearing in mind our function is really, really quite simple, and that is to collect the money safely on behalf of fans and subscribe for shares. So there really is very little opportunity for conflict.
It's as we said earlier, it's a buy-in, not a buy-out. It's not a takeover. If we couldn't work with Leanne, why would we be doing all this? And as Jim's saying, the first thing was also about resources. So we're going in a partnership here to buy in, and I think if we didn't have a constructive working relationship with Leanne, then why would you want to be going in that direction? You'd be looking to try and get her out, and that isn't the situation. Equally, people have an assurance that Jim, myself, Jackie McNamara, none of us are patsies and are going to be dictated to. If we feel there's a point of principle, we'll express it. But equally, it's the point, as Jim says, about resources, about who can actually do it. And equally, we have had money in, we have made those first purchase of shares. Had we been trying to do this entirely separate, then we would have been spending money on corporate lawyers, on financial advisors, and we would probably still be asking for money in, and we still wouldn't have bought any shares. So we've had the benefit of getting professional advice where we can give the directions, and they, will take that on board as the instructions, and we can give the assurance that every penny is going towards the acquisition of these shares. It's not going to us, and it's certainly not going to, as I say, professional advisors whose advice won't come cheap.
Excellent. Right, well, I've got a couple of just broader football questions here for you. Obviously people were interested to get your opinion on a couple of things, not necessarily to do with Hibs, one of which is just before you guys came in, we had a wee chat about was the hot topic at the minute is the reintroduction of alcohol at football. We had a wee chat about it. We'll tell you what you said after we've had your opinion on the matter, but it seems like it's in the news this week. Certain politicians are trying to bring it to the forefront that alcohol should be sold at games again. What do you guys feel on that matter?
Well, I've actually just penned 900 words for the national newspaper for tomorrow, and I've been, discussing with police. And I think, first of all, the politicking that's going on from Jim Murphy, I think, his abuse of rugby. I was actually at the rugby on Sunday was, unfair and. Alcohol is at football. I mean, Jim and I went to promote the thing when we were going round, the famous 5 stand. You go to the Kerrydale Suite in Parkgate, they can get it's either 1,400 or 1,700 people in every match day. What we're talking about, I think, is not the wholesale opening up of alcohol in there. There are some games that alcohol can never be sold at. They will just be too high risk. There are some parts of the ground that it will not be acceptable, but there are other areas, such as the famous 5 stand, such as the Kerrydale Suite, where frankly we should just acknowledge that it's there and licence it and deal with it that way. There are other areas I think we should be prepared in Scotland to think out of the box, perhaps low alcohol, because this idea in Europe that you get alcohol, well, it can be restricted. I've been at games in Spain and there was zero alcohol. It was alcohol with no alcohol content. So I think, there's room for maneuver. I welcome the consultation from the SFA. I think Police Scotland are willing to look at it constructively, and I think the best thing is not for politicians to be shouting from the sidelines. I think if we let the SFA and Police Scotland sit down, I think you'll find that there's room for progress that will allow an appropriate balance, because we're not going back to what it was like before the 80s. Nobody wants that. I was at the rugby. You do get complaints about people coming in with their pints and going out to the loo, when the game's still halfway through. But actually, the concourse arrangement, and I know the SFA would be interested in that for international games, the fan zone that St Mirren had works remarkably well. So I think there's an opportunity to build on what we've currently got, because this idea it's only at hospitality, no, it's not. It's not just Hibs and the Kerrydale Suite. I go down because I'm pally with Henry McClelland at Annan Athletic. They've got the social club slap bang next to the ground. So can you get a drink at Annan? Actually, you just go into the social club. It's how you regulate and licence it. Some areas, some games, no, never. Other areas, let's look at it.
No, it was interesting because we chat before, sort of five or six guys in their sort of mid to late 20s. As Sam pointed out, are probably the target audience for any sort of alcohol sales at the game. And to be honest, we were all pretty lukewarm about it. I mean, quite non-committal. My point was this nuisance factor of people getting up to go to the toilet throughout the game. But there's something. Just small positive things that have been happening at Hibs. The smoking area outside the East Stand, I think, has been a really positive thing, even though it's just a small matter. I'm a non-smoker, and that's I enjoy the games a lot more when I'm not fighting through the clouds of smoke in the toilet at half time. So just small steps like that. Fans being treated like adults again, I think is.
Well, that's why I think we should see what the SFA consultation comes back with from engaging with yourself and with others. I think what you'll find is people will make it clear that they don't want folk traipsing in, so it'll be no drink in the stadium. It's about elsewhere, whether that's out with the ground, because actually the atmosphere at Murrayfield was remarkable in terms of people going early, not rushing in with 5 minutes to go, having been in the Roseburn bar on Murrayfield. could go with their kids. There was music, there was entertainment. These things, you wouldn't necessarily do that at league games, but you can certainly do it at big games, and that's acceptable. And equally, as I say, I think what you've got at the famous 5 stand is perfectly reasonable. And you have to ask yourself, why do you have to go back down to come back in? If you actually could just walk through, this idea, there isn't any alcohol. Yes, there is, and you'd have to go through this facade of traipsing in one set of stairs, traipsing back out and going in again. If people don't behave themselves, they get barred. If the club doesn't manage it rightly, it loses its licence as a public house would, but you don't allow those fans who are just wanting to sit and enjoy the game to be disturbed by people coming or going or spilling their drink over them.
No, that's Hermit Crab on Hibsnet. I'm sorry for all these usernames. It was asking on a similar sort of note about the possible reintroduction of safe standing areas in top flight football. Such as as per the German model. Safe standing areas. In Easter Road, for example. Is that something you'd be in favour of?
I have to say, I think these things have to be looked at. I think the police have, because I know Celtic, the police had been passing it to the council has been passing it back to the police because the applications come in there. I mean, I have to say, my son lived in Sweden for 2 years. I used to go and watch games there. I remember going to watch IFK Gothenburg, where they had a standing area which was one, set of goals behind behind the goals. I found it remarkably, lively. Couldn't necessarily understand everything because I don't speak Swedish, but it worked reasonably well there. In Scotland, is it exactly the same? No, because they tend not to have a travelling support to the same extent as you have here because of the size of the country and the distance in commuting. But it doesn't necessarily mean it won't work. I think these things are for the... but coming back to alcohol and football, politicians should butt out of it and let the police and the SFA work this through. But I think what I can say is, I think making and from going in and chatting away to people at Adie, bringing in 10,000 seater stadiums and forcing that to be built has been calamitous for clubs such as Adie. Mr. Ballantyne, is struggling to fund and support it. So, some of these rules that came in a reaction are no longer appropriate. Scottish football has to cut its cloth accordingly, has to meet with the needs of fans. So I think that these things have to be looked at. It works on the continent. Equally, Scotland's not necessarily the same as Sweden or Germany. But I have to say, I don't have any opposition in principle to it, and I can see, if it's probably better that than having clubs, and I know some clubs, without naming them, that have had discussions about closing down stands, and not using them. That would be a bigger disaster for football than actually trying to encourage perhaps a slightly, you could certainly, at IFK Gothenburg, it was about, £10 cheaper if you went in the standing area or you went in the sitting area. Equally, most people who went to the standing area did so because they wanted the atmosphere of bouncing up and down for, 90 minutes, and good luck to them.
Oh, excellent. Just a question that popped into my head there. I think we're probably going to wrap up in a second, but I know it's possibly slightly outside your constituency, but there's a good chance it could be another Edinburgh derby coming up quite soon. Spartans are off to Berwick tomorrow to try and secure a place at Easter Road in the quarter-finals. Have you got any messages for Spartans? Any sort of, you've been following their progress?
Absolutely. One of my pals used to be the captain of them for many a year, and I know Spartans very well because when I was a Justice Secretary through Cashback for Communities, Spartans do a remarkable job in the north of the city, and I know they're the template for a lot of clubs the length and breadth of Scotland that are smaller seek to emulate them. So I think it'd be good for the city. For Spartans, I have to say my own non-league commitment is with Edinburgh City because I live in Meadowbank, and as well as the Hibs, I do have an affinity for Edinburgh City and have a wee advert in their match programme. But no, I think it would be great if Spartans could win at Berwick and get a Edinburgh derby going.
Well, Edinburgh City are going to win the Lowland League though, so it's a trade-off.
Well, yeah.
No, that's grand. Sam, you want to wrap up there?
Yes, just to say thank you very much for your time, guys. I think that was very illuminating. Great to get to hear you guys talk about it. You know, we've seen a lot, as Connor said, there've been a lot of questions answered, but forums, you know, they only give so much, and that kind of bite-sized pieces of information. Nice to hear you guys talk with the enthusiasm that you've clearly got for the subject matter. So thank you very much for your time. We very much appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, and we will let you get away because it's almost time. So I'm going to throw a couple of adverts, and then we will come back to dissect the weekend's football. Thank you for staying with us on Monday Night Football.